The Precipice of Virtue. Blood trickled down Andreas's knuckles as he stared at the shattered mirror, fragments of his reflection scattered across the bathroom sink. The face looking back at him from the broken pieces was unrecognizable. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under piercing blue eyes, and a 3-day stubble that did nothing to hide the tension in his jaw. At 33, he had the physique of an athlete, maintained through rigorous mountain hiking despite his meager income, but the weight of his choices hung heavy on his broad shoulders. Outside the window of his modest apartment in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, the Bavarian Alps stood majestic against the March twilight. Snow still capped the peaks, though spring was beginning to touch the valleys. The mountains had always been his sanctuary, the place where his mind found clarity among the silence and thin air. But today, not even their eternal presence could calm the storm brewing within him. Andreas wrapped a small towel around his bleeding hand. "Control what you can control," he muttered to himself, reciting the mantra he'd adopted from his worn copy of Epictetus's Enchiridion. The book sat open on his nightstand, underlined passages bearing witness to his years of study in Stoic philosophy, a practice that had sustained him through the hardships of a life that had never quite matched his potential. His phone vibrated against the wooden nightstand. The caller ID displayed Victor Schaller, a name that represented both opportunity and moral compromise. Andreas let it ring 3 times before answering. "It's ready?" Andreas asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in his wounded hand. "Tomorrow night. The client is pleased with the arrangements. She will meet you at the Vault Hotel as planned." Victor's voice was smooth, businesslike. "Remember, this is not just about the money, Andreas. This is about connections, the kind that can change your situation permanently." Andreas closed his eyes. "And the other matter?" "The package will be in the hotel safe. Room 212. Memorize the combination. 33-1, 7-42. Once the evening concludes with Frau Brenner, you'll have access. Simple exchange. You deliver it to the address I gave you by Monday." "And if I decide this isn't for me after all?" Victor's laugh was cold. "You're not paid to decide, my friend. You're paid to look handsome in a suit, charm a lonely rich woman, and transport a small package. For 10,000 euros. More than you make in 3 months at that pathetic resort job." The mention of the money made Andreas's stomach tighten. His sister's medical bills loomed large, and his salary as an assistant manager at a mid-tier ski resort barely covered his own expenses. "I'll be there," Andreas said finally, ending the call before setting the phone down with careful deliberation. He walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. His breath fogged the view of the mountains that had witnessed generations come and go, their problems as temporary as footprints in snow. In those ancient peaks, Andreas found a reminder of the Stoic principle that had guided him through his hardest days. Amor fati, the love of one's fate. "Accept what you cannot change," he whispered to himself. "Act virtuously in what you can." But what was virtue in a world where good people suffered while the corrupt prospered? His sister Eva's face flashed in his mind, her features drawn with pain from the rare autoimmune condition that German health care only partially covered. The experimental treatment that might help her remained financially out of reach. Andreas crossed his small living room to a framed photograph on the wall, he and Eva smiling on a mountain peak, back when her body was strong enough to join him on hikes. Next to it hung a simple wooden plaque with Marcus Aurelius's words burned into it. "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He traced the letters with his fingertips. Tomorrow night would determine whether he would find his way through compromise or hold fast to principles that had yet to reward him with anything but poverty and struggle. The Wald Hotel Sonnenhof gleamed with old-world elegance against the mountain backdrop. Andreas arrived precisely at 8, dressed in a charcoal suit borrowed from his only wealthy friend. His reflection in the polished brass of the revolving door showed a man transformed. Confident, poised, handsome even. A man playing a role. "Herr Weber," the concierge greeted him with practiced deference. "Frau Brenner awaits you in the Alpenglow dining room." Andreas nodded, swallowing the discomfort of using his mother's maiden name for this charade. The weight of the key card to room 212 pressed against his chest from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Victor had arranged everything with clinical precision. The Alpenglow was the hotel's crown jewel, a glass-walled space that seemed to float among the mountains, now bathed in the last crimson light of day. Claudia Brenner sat alone at a corner table, the sunset casting her in dramatic relief. At 45, she exuded the kind of confidence that came with wealth and power. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo, exposing a neck adorned with diamonds that caught the dying light. "Andreas," she smiled, extending a hand adorned with a single platinum band, her wedding ring, Andreas noted, with a twinge of conscience. "I was beginning to think Victor had exaggerated your charms." Andreas took her hand, brushing his lips against her knuckles in the old-fashioned manner Victor had instructed. "Frau Brenner, the pleasure is mine." "Claudia, please," she corrected, her eyes evaluating him with unconcealed interest. "We should dispense with formalities since we'll be spending the evening together." Andreas settled into the chair across from her, accepting the glass of champagne a waiter materialized to pour. "To new acquaintances," he offered, raising his glass. "To mutually beneficial arrangements," Claudia countered, her smile revealing perfect teeth and absolutely no warmth. The meal progressed through 7 courses of exquisite Alpine cuisine, each paired with wines that probably cost more than Andreas's monthly rent. Throughout, Claudia spoke of her life, her industrialist husband frequently traveling, her boredom with the social circles of Munich's elite, her appreciation for authentic experiences with real people. The subtext was clear in every lingering touch on Andreas's arm, every deliberate lowering of her gaze to his lips when he spoke. Andreas played his part with practiced charm, drawing on the natural magnetism that had always made people trust him. He asked thoughtful questions, laughed at appropriate moments, and projected exactly the image of an intelligent, physically vital man, temporarily down on his luck but possessing untapped potential, the fantasy Victor had told him Claudia desired. "You're different than Victor's usual selections," Claudia mused over dessert, an elaborate construction of chocolate and local berries. "More substance. I can see the mind behind those eyes." She reached across to touch his cheek. "It makes me wonder why a man like you would agree to an arrangement like this." Andreas held her gaze. "We all make compromises when necessity demands it." "Necessity?" She raised an eyebrow. "Or ambition?" "Perhaps both," Andreas admitted, deciding that a partial truth might seem more authentic than a complete fabrication. "My sister is ill. Treatments are expensive." Claudia's expression softened fractionally. "Ah, nobility in corruption. How refreshing." She signaled for the check. "Shall we continue this conversation somewhere more private?" "I've taken the liberty of reserving the König suite." Andreas felt a cold weight settle in his stomach, but maintained his smile. "Lead the way." As they rose from the table, he caught sight of a man watching them from the bar, middle-aged, powerfully built, with the alert eyes of someone accustomed to assessing threats. The man raised his whiskey glass slightly in Andreas's direction, a gesture that might have seemed friendly to anyone else, but struck Andreas as a warning. In the elevator, Claudia pressed against him, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. "You know what I expect," she murmured, her hand sliding inside his jacket. Andreas caught her wrist gently. "Patience has its rewards," he said, voice low and promising. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor. The Koenig suite was opulent, a showcase of alpine luxury with panoramic windows, revealing mountains now silvered by moonlight. Claudia moved immediately to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of cognac while Andreas pretended to admire the view, his mind racing through the evening's true purpose. Room 212. The package, the combination, 3-1-7-42. You seem distracted, Claudia observed, handing him a crystal tumbler. Andreas turned to her with a practiced smile. Just appreciating that such beauty exists in the world. He gestured toward the mountains, but maintained eye contact with her. She laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily transformed her face. You're good at this, almost too good. She took a sip of her cognac. It makes me wonder what else you might be involved in. The question hung in the air between them. Andreas felt the first prickle of apprehension at the base of his spine. I'm not sure I understand, he said carefully. Claudia set down her glass and stepped closer, running her fingers along his tie. Victor Schaller has many enterprises. Not all of them involve providing company to bored wives. Her eyes searched his. Some involve moving things of value across borders without tedious paperwork. Andreas kept his expression neutral, despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. I'm just here for the evening, Claudia. Of course you are, she smiled, the warmth not reaching her eyes. And I'm just a lonely woman seeking companionship. She leaned in, her lips brushing his ear. But we both know better, don't we? Before Andreas could respond, her phone chimed. Claudia glanced at it, her expression shifting subtly. Excuse me a moment, she said, moving toward the bathroom. Make yourself comfortable. This won't take long. As soon as the bathroom door closed, Andreas moved swiftly to the window, scanning the moonlit grounds below. The man from the bar was standing in the garden, speaking into a phone, while looking up at the hotel's facade. Something about his stance suggested he was not hotel security, but something more official. Andreas's mind raced through Epictetus's teachings. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. He needed to assess what was truly within his control in this rapidly deteriorating situation. His fingers found his own phone, pulling up the text conversation with Victor. The last message, received an hour ago, simply read, Package secured. Proceed as planned. The bathroom door opened and Claudia emerged, her demeanor subtly altered, more businesslike, less seductive. I find myself suddenly tired, she announced. Perhaps we should conclude our evening. Andreas recognized the shift immediately. Something had changed. Is everything all right? Perfectly, she smiled tightly. My husband has returned early from his trip. While our arrangement includes his tacit acceptance of my diversions, discretion remains paramount. It was a plausible explanation, but Andreas didn't believe it for a second. The timing was too convenient, the change too abrupt. Of course, he nodded. I understand completely. Claudia moved to her purse, extracting an envelope. For your time, she said, holding it out to him. Consider it a down payment on future encounters. Andreas took the envelope, noting its thickness. You're very generous. I value quality, she replied, her eyes calculating now. Victor said you were staying in room 212. I'll have the concierge arrange a bottle of champagne to be sent there, a small token of my appreciation. The mention of his supposed room number confirmed Andreas's suspicions. This was a test, and possibly a trap. That's very thoughtful, he said smoothly. Though I believe there's been some confusion. I'm in 214 inches. Something flashed in Claudia's eyes. Surprise, perhaps respect. My mistake, she recovered quickly. 214 it is. Their goodbye was perfunctory, the pretense of attraction abandoned. In the elevator down, Andreas leaned against the wall, mind racing through his options. The obvious move would be to leave immediately, abandoning whatever scheme Victor had entangled him in. But that would mean forfeiting the money his sister desperately needed. As he crossed the lobby, he spotted the man from the bar again, now seated in a leather armchair with a newspaper, though his attention was clearly on the elevator bank. Their eyes met briefly before Andreas turned toward the side corridor that led to the guest rooms. Room 212 was located in a quiet wing. Andreas approached cautiously, noting the absence of housekeeping carts or other guests. Using the key card Victor had provided, he slipped inside, immediately engulfed by darkness, save for the soft glow of moonlight through partially drawn curtains. He moved silently to the safe, concealed behind a landscape painting of the Alps in winter. The combination 33-17-42 opened it with a soft click. Inside lay a small package wrapped in black cloth, approximately the size of a hardback book. Andreas unwrapped it partially, revealing a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Curiosity overcame caution. He opened the box, only to find it contained an antique pocket watch. Puzzled, he examined it more closely. The watch appeared genuinely old and valuable, but hardly worth the elaborate deception. Unless... Andreas carefully turned it over in his hands until he felt a nearly imperceptible seam. Pressing gently on both sides, the back of the watch case opened to reveal a hidden compartment containing a small flash drive. The sound of voices in the hallway jolted him back to the present danger. Andreas quickly rewrapped the package and slipped it into his inside jacket pocket. He moved to the window, assessing whether it offered a viable escape route, when a key card reader beeped at the door. With nowhere to hide, Andreas adopted the only strategy left to him: audacity. He sat casually in the armchair by the window, legs crossed, as if he belonged there. The door opened to reveal the man from the bar, now accompanied by a woman in a tailored suit. Both froze momentarily at the sight of him. "Good evening," Andreas offered calmly. "I believe there's been some confusion." The woman recovered first, her hand moving subtly beneath her jacket. "Herr Weber, is it? You seem to have entered the wrong room." "On the contrary," Andreas replied, drawing on every ounce of stoic composure. "I was invited here by the room's occupant. Perhaps you're the ones who've made a mistake." The man stepped forward, his stance professional but threatening. "Federal Police. I think it's best if you come with us for a brief conversation." Andreas's mind raced through his options. Running would confirm guilt. Fighting was futile against trained officers. Denial might work if they had no concrete evidence yet. His stoic training had prepared him for this moment, to face reality without flinching, to control his response if not the circumstance itself. "I'm happy to clear up any misunderstanding," he said, rising slowly, hands visible. "Though I'd appreciate knowing what this concerns." The female officer moved to block the door. "We have reason to believe you're involved in transporting stolen intellectual property. The woman you met tonight, Claudia Brenner, is actually Hannah Weiss, an executive with Geisler Pharmaceutical." Andreas maintained his composure while his mind processed this revelation. Victor had set him up as a pawn in corporate espionage, not merely as an escort. "I was hired as a companion for the evening by a man named Victor Schaller," Andreas stated truthfully. "Any other purpose was not disclosed to me." The male officer's eyes narrowed. "And what's in your jacket pocket?" Andreas felt the weight of the package against his chest. In that moment, he made a decision based not on fear or self-preservation, but on the stoic principle of choosing virtue even when easier paths existed. "A package I was instructed to collect," he said, slowly removing it. "I don't know its full contents, though I discovered it contains a watch and what appears to be a flash drive." The officers exchanged glances of surprise at his candor. You understand this admission may implicate you in a serious crime? The woman asked. Andreas nodded. I understand that actions have consequences. I also understand the difference between being used unwittingly and being complicit. He held out the package. I believe this contains proprietary information stolen from Geisler Pharmaceutical. I was to deliver it to an address in Munich on Monday. The male officer took the package, examining the flash drive with raised eyebrows. Most people in your position would be denying everything or trying to run. Running postpones but doesn't prevent consequences, Andreas replied. My sister taught me that during her illness. Something in his tone must have reached them, because the female officer's stance softened slightly. You mentioned your sister is ill? Autoimmune condition. The treatment she needs isn't covered by insurance. Victor Schaller offered me 10,000 euros for what he described as a simple escort job with a package delivery. The male officer wrapped the evidence in a plastic bag. You'll need to come with us to make a formal statement. Your cooperation will be noted, but I can't make promises about charges. Andreas nodded, accepting this fate with the equanimity his philosophical studies had cultivated. As they led him from the room, he found himself thinking of Seneca's words. Sometimes even to live is an act of courage. The police station in Garmisch-Partenkirchen was small but efficient, the interview room sparse but not uncomfortable. Andreas spent hours recounting everything, how he'd met Victor 3 months ago while working at the resort, the gradual grooming for special assignments, the financial desperation that had made him vulnerable to manipulation. By dawn, the full picture had emerged. Victor Schaller was a middleman for corporate espionage, using people in financial distress as unwitting couriers. The flash drive contained proprietary research on a breakthrough treatment for, of all things, autoimmune disorders. The irony was not lost on Andreas. The pharmaceutical executive, Frau Weiss, she was working with you? Andreas asked as the formal interview concluded. Detective Berg, the male officer, nodded. For 6 months, Victor approached her with a similar proposition, in her case, selling research to competitors. She reported it immediately. When he mentioned using a new courier, we saw an opportunity to gather concrete evidence. So I was bait, Andreas stated without rancor. You were a variable we hadn't fully assessed, Detective Leitner, his female counterpart, corrected. Your cooperation changed the equation significantly. What happens now? Andreas asked. Berg consulted his notes. Given your voluntary cooperation and lack of prior knowledge about the true nature of the crime, the prosecutor is inclined toward leniency, likely probation, provided you testify against Schaller. Andreas absorbed this with quiet relief. And Victor? We're picking him up this morning along with his contacts at the competing pharmaceutical company, Leitner said. This operation has been dismantled. As the interview concluded and paperwork was processed, Andreas found himself in the station's waiting area. Morning light streamed through barred windows, illuminating the worn benches and outdated posters on crime prevention. He felt strangely at peace despite the uncertainty of his future. For the first time in months, his actions aligned with his principles, regardless of the cost. The door opened, and Detective Leitner appeared with a woman Andreas immediately recognized from photographs, though they'd never met in person. Dr. Hannah Weiss, the pharmaceutical executive who had posed as Claudia Brenner. Herr Weber, she acknowledged him, her manner professional but not unkind. I requested a moment to speak with you privately. Andreas stood, curious. Detective Leitner nodded and stepped outside, leaving them alone. I want to thank you for your decision last night, Doctor, Weiss began. The research on that drive represents years of work that could help thousands of patients. Including those with autoimmune conditions? Andreas asked. She looked surprised. Yes, that's our primary focus. How did you know? "My sister Ava has been battling one for 3 years," he explained. "The experimental treatments are beyond our financial reach." Dr. Weiss studied him with new interest. "What's her specific diagnosis?" "Systemic sclerosis with pulmonary involvement." She nodded slowly. "We're beginning clinical trials next month. Given the circumstances—" She paused, considering her words carefully. "I believe we could arrange to include her, should her case meet the medical criteria." Andreas stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Why would you do that?" "Consider it enlightened self-interest," she replied with a slight smile. "Your integrity potentially saved our company millions in research and development costs. More importantly, it preserved treatments that might reach patients years sooner than if we had to start over." "I didn't act for reward," Andreas said quietly. "Precisely why you deserve one," she countered, handing him a business card. "Have your sister's doctor contact me directly. We'll handle the arrangements discreetly." After she left, Andreas sat alone, turning the card over in his fingers. The mountains visible through the station window stood impassive as always, witnesses to human triumphs and failings across centuries. In their presence, Andreas thought of Marcus Aurelius's wisdom. "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." 1 month later, Andreas stood on the balcony of his sister's hospital room in Munich. Spring had fully arrived, painting the distant Alps with the first green of the season. Behind him, Ava slept peacefully, the experimental treatment beginning to show promising results after just 2 weeks. His testimony against Victor Schaller had resulted in exactly what the detectives had predicted: probation rather than incarceration, a second chance he had not been certain he deserved. More surprisingly, his actions had caught the attention of Dr. Weiss's security team, who had offered him a position in their corporate integrity division, work that paid 3 times his previous salary and drew upon his natural ability to read people and situations. Andreas turned from the view to watch his sister breathe. The mountain air that had once been painful for her damaged lungs now filled them more easily. The doctors spoke of improvement, not miracles, but for the first time in years, hope was not just a philosophical concept, but a tangible reality. On the small table beside her bed sat his worn copy of Epictetus, open to a passage he had read to her that morning. "Demand not that events should happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and you will go on well." Andreas had spent his life seeking control, only to find freedom in accepting what he could not change, while acting virtuously in what he could. The scandal that might have destroyed him had instead become the crucible that refined his character. As Ava stirred from sleep, opening eyes that seemed brighter than they had in months, Andreas felt the truth of what the Stoics had tried to teach him all along. Virtue was not just its own reward. It was the only lasting one worth pursuing. "You're still here," Eva murmured, reaching for his hand. "Always," Andreas replied, the single word containing all the philosophy he would ever need. In the distance, the Alps stood eternal, indifferent to human drama, yet somehow affirming the significance of human choice. Andreas had nearly fallen from their metaphorical heights, but had found his footing on the precipice of virtue, the narrow ledge where principle and necessity meet, where a man discovers what he truly values when everything else falls away. He had entered the valley of compromise, but emerged on higher ground, his integrity intact despite the scandal that had nearly consumed him. In accepting his fate rather than fighting it, he had paradoxically changed its course. In choosing virtue over expedience, he had found both. As sunshine painted the room in shades of hope, Andreas recalled Seneca's words that had sustained him through the darkest moments. "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. The whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately." In this moment, watching his sister heal, feeling the weight of honest work waiting for him, knowing his choices had aligned with his deepest values despite temptation. Andreas understood that he had finally learned to live immediately, neither regretting yesterday nor fearing tomorrow. Outside the window, the Alps remained, ancient, patient, immutable. Within their shadow, a man had discovered that the true measure of wealth was not in euros, but in the currency of choices made according to principle rather than pressure. In losing everything he thought he wanted, Andreas Weber had gained everything he truly needed. And in that paradox lay the final truth of Stoicism, that freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the mastery of response to them. Not in escaping fate, but in embracing it with dignity. Not in avoiding scandal, but in finding within its chaos the opportunity for virtue. Thank you for listening to the end of this story. If you enjoyed this dive into the world of complex moral dilemmas and philosophical reflections against the backdrop of the picturesque Bavarian Alps, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Click on the notifications button to be the first to hear our new stories where scandal meets deep philosophical undertones. Each new story is a journey into human nature, temptation, and virtue. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what philosophical themes you'd like to hear in the next stories. See you in the world of exciting storytelling.